Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl. Welcome to our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting series.
Here are the 10 nominees for Best Motion Picture of the Year.
Anora.
The Brutalist.
A Complete Unknown.
Conclave.
Dune, Part 2.
Amelia Perez.
I'm Still Here.
Nickel Boys.
The Substance.
And Wicked.
And on today's episode, we'll be discussing A Complete Unknown, which racked up 8 Academy Award nominations. And we're joined by a very special guest, the co-host of the Vigilante 1939 podcast, Nick Zednik.
Welcome into our first episode of the 2025 Best Picture Revisiting series. We're all here. We're going to start talking about A Complete Unknown, a film that I really like, but has definitely been a little bit wrongfully maligned. But obviously not by the Academy. 8 Oscar nominations, which I know surprised the hell out of me. I did not see that coming.
Yeah, A Complete Unknown is a film that I feel like has gotten a really weird rep so far throughout award season because, I mean, every year people make their villains, especially before they even see the films, and it seemed like fresh off of Elvis, Bohemian Rhapsody a few years ago, especially Maestro last year, people really have it out for these musical biopics, and I guess I can see the reasons for some of those. Other ones I feel kind of got unfairly treated. So I guess the first part of our discussion here today is, why do you think people underestimate A Complete Unknown all season long? Was it because of the rush production schedule? It's just a musical biopic, or it's a film people just didn't want to see do well?
Well, I think that there's a few different reasons for that. Like you mentioned, I feel like the rush production schedule, they finished filming in, I think, April or May last year. That definitely scared people a lot. But beyond that, Bob Dylan is such an enigmatic figure where he's such a strange guy. How do you capture that in a biopic? Specifically, how do you capture that in like a conventional biopic? Because we've had a Bob Dylan biopic before, I'm Not There by Todd Haynes, which is a fantastic movie. But the whole point of that one is that it was not a regular biography. Instead of just telling a life story, they cast 7 different actors to play different stages of Bob Dylan. And so I know at first I was a little worried, how do you make a Bob Dylan movie like you're making Bohemian Rhapsody or Elvis? And ultimately, I don't think they did make it like they made those movies, but that's a whole other point. But like, as for how people underestimated it, I think people, myself included, really don't have a high opinion of like this type of movie where you just take a Wikipedia article and you film scenes of all the highlights. And I don't think that this movie was that, but I can see why people for such a long time resisted admitting that maybe the Academy might like something like this, because frankly, I feel like a lot of people didn't want to admit that they might like something like this.
Yeah, I know for me, like, biopics are always so hit or miss, right? Like, you either are really going to love them or you're going to kind of hate them. I think for me, A Complete Unknown was like, it was kind of like an unknown. Like, you didn't know how it was going to turn out, for lack of a better term. So when I was judging the movie, I was like, well, the ceiling's either going to be really high or it's going to kind of fall right in the middle. But because I was like, as long as it's good, as long as the performances are good, as long as there's something engaging and interesting about the movie, I had no reason to doubt that the Academy wasn't going to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick hit it right on the head, is this movie is a jam session. And going further than that, just about the film and its Best Picture nomination at whole, I really enjoy what A Complete Unknown really stands for, because it's a film about a rebel who cannot be confined, and I feel like that spirit really lends itself to the filmmaking itself. And Mangold is this guy who has had this long career in Hollywood, and people paint him out to be this guy who just does films by the numbers, but I always find that a lot of his films have such a unique voice, very similar to Bob Dylan inside of this movie, and he's always trying to break out of boundaries, and everything feels new, it feels original, it feels different, and this movie is exactly that as well. And I really like, Matt, you talked about this a little bit before, of how they really subvert these typical biopic tropes, and instead of being like a cradle to grave narrative, they focus on this specific moment in Bob Dylan's career, and by doing this, it gives them more time with these characters, more times to have this jam session like Nick's talking about, and just enjoy these musical numbers, enjoy these great moments, and really see these amazing performances truly shine in ways that other musical biopics really wouldn't give you the space to do so.
I also think if I can say, like, one thing too, is I think like the movie itself is actually just a vibe, like just like the way that like the cinematography looks, the way that the rock concerts are all set up and laid up, the production design of it all. Chalamet, Barbaro, Elle Fanning, Ed Norton, just the way that everybody looks and feels, the way that they talk. The one thing that I keep going back to, even with A Complete Unknown, and I'm sure you guys will feel the same way, it's that we've seen so many of these biopics at this point, especially like if you're a hardcore cinephile, as I'm sure all of us are, or even if you're just a film buff. We've seen so many of these musical biopics, especially. It's so hard to try to reinvent the wheel and do something new. That to me, why I love the movie so much was that I just found something I connected to and I just rolled with it. Like, that's really all that you can do with these biopics now, is just extracting elements that you can connect to.
I completely agree. We have seen this formula so many times. The thing that stands out about this for me is that even though we've seen this movie about a young singer-songwriter rising to fame, the way that this zoned in on his character and the way that the title relates to that character, I found so interesting, because he really is a complete unknown. It starts off by establishing, we don't see him as a kid. We don't see him learning to play the guitar. We see him the way that everyone in New York saw him. He gets out of a car, coming from who knows where, and he just has a guitar and a few dollars to his name. And that's the myth of Bob Dylan. This is a movie that's not about the person. It's about the myth that he cast over himself. Why is he so guarded about his identity and who he is? Why can he not even tell his girlfriend anything about his past or his family? We don't learn anything about him that he doesn't want us to know. And I liked that take to a music biopic. It wasn't trying to give us the true story. It was giving us the story as filtered through one of the most puzzling figures in music history. Someone who, I really like that scene where him and Elle Fanning's character go to see the Bette Davis movie. And she says, she went on this trip and she discovered who she was. And Bob Dylan says, she didn't discover who she was. She just decided to be someone else. And that's kind of who he is. He's not authentic. And for the movie to be about folk music, which is a form that's all about authenticity, it's about like the least authentic person you could possibly imagine. And so I appreciated that. I really appreciated it. But Dylan, to what you were saying about James Mangold, I can't get on board with the directing nomination here, because while I believe that James Mangold is a really strong craftsman, he makes movies in a way that is slick and polished and serviceable, I don't know if the way that he films really brings a unique perspective, at least just in the filmmaking. I thought that this one had a unique perspective in the writing, but to me it looked like and sounded like and felt like, moved like any other music biopic.
And yeah, I guess I'm going to disagree with that a little bit here, because the Academy really shocked us all on nomination morning when they shouted out James Mangold's name, who had been largely overlooked in the Best Director category for his, I would say, phenomenal work on A Complete Unknown. Because really, outside of the DGA, he hasn't really gotten much notoriety this season. There's been a lot of people online who seem confused or upset or irritated by this, but to me, it's a mostly inspired nomination of the bunch. And yeah. Before you say in the comments, I personally did enjoy Corley Farjah's direction the most of all of our nominees this year for The Substance. Such a singular, distinctive vision, but this isn't a Substance episode. It's a Complete Unknown episode, because what Mangold is doing inside this film is nothing short of excellence. And I really appreciate the way that he captures these musical moments. Early on, this camera, it stays wide so you can see that these actors, they're singing, they're playing the instruments, and they are performing live on set. And as we become more familiar with these performers and settle into the world of this film, Mangold, he lets loose, adding in more movement, dynamicism, and whimsy to these musical sequences. And the way he directs these moments makes you feel like you're in the front row of these concerts, witnessing the history unfold in real time. And at least for me, this was one of my favorite nominations in the entirety of Oscar nomination morning.
I think it's fascinating that he's the one that snuck in, considering that he did only get the DGA nom, and considering that Best Director usually goes to like the directing achievement. You look at all the people that he got in over. It is actually kind of crazy. But I do agree with you guys that A Complete Unknown probably could have been directed by anybody, and you probably could have just slapped any director's name on it. But I think it's fascinating because the movie surged at the right time, and he kind of just came along with it, right? Like, you look at, like, who else probably, ideally, at that same exact time could have gotten in, right? Because Ramel Ross, much as we love him, wasn't really hitting that stride. You know, Denis Villeneuve, we knew he was going to get snubbed. So then you kind of you got to go down the list, and it's like, it's James Mangold. It's the one that nobody wanted to predict that was going to happen, because this movie turned out to what I think people were having 9 or 10 in Best Picture is probably ideally like a 5 or 6. So it's like, at this point, I think, is Mangold really surprising? Maybe, but
Yeah, I think it's surprising to me just on the perspective of, like, year after year, we see that the type of movies that the director's branch goes for, as the rest of the Academy is getting international, you know, that's where they've been for so long. And, you know, last year they did Justine Triet and Jonathan Glazer. And so I would have expected something like, I don't know. I mean, Ramel Ross, Nickel Boys still got into Best Picture. It could have been here. Or, you know, we had the surge for I'm Still Here. We could have seen Walter Salles come along. So I don't know. It's a unique and different nomination because it's so plain. Let's talk showiness, though, because you keep saying that word, Dylan, showy. And when I think showy, I think of Timothée Chalamet in this movie, because goddamn, he is giving his all in every scene. Where does Chalamet place for you guys in the pantheon of pop music biopic performances? Like, thinking about Rami Malek, Austin Butler, or even Joaquin Phoenix in Walk the Line, Jamie Foxx in Ray. How are you guys feeling about, like, where his legacy will be when we think of this type of performance?
I know for me, I think what you really have to ask yourself is, like, am I going to remember this performance? Like, can you associate the performance with the movie, right? We've kind of just talked about how there's been so many different portrayals of different characters, right? Like, I think if you can make an impact, if you can put your own stamp on something, I think you've succeeded. Like, do I think, like, I'm going to say, hey, remember that Bob Dylan movie? Oh, yeah, that was with Timothée Chalamet, right? That one. That's the one you're talking about. So I think, like, you know, and he's such a young actor. He's such a charismatic actor. He really gets you into the performance that he's trying to sell you on. So with that, to me, is like, I probably will associate Timothée Chalamet with Bob Dylan, to be honest. I think that's a credit to how well he took the character on, just reading on about how he learned to play the folk music himself, and he really wanted to master the mannerisms and just the way that he walks, the way that he carries himself. So yeah, I think it's definitely a performance that, like, if you had asked me a year ago, would that be in the winning conversation, might have a different response. But now when we're looking at it and it's February leading into March, I think he's toe-to-toe with Adrian Brody right now. And that's not something I would have said a year ago.
I'm going to try to keep my bias in check here, because being completely honest with everyone out there, Timothée Chalamet's probably my favorite working actor currently. I think he has this great instinct when it comes to choosing roles. And when I first heard that he was cast as Bob Dylan in A Complete Unknown, I was a little hesitant, just like you, Nick. And like, he was in Wonka. We heard him sing. There's positives, there's negatives with that performance there. But what you can't say is that he didn't really try his hardest in that role, like what Matt's talking about. He always brings his A game, and I feel like that's very rare for this A-list movie star quality that people talk about out there with the state of Hollywood right now. But I might go as far to say that A Complete Unknown is the moment in Timothée Chalamet's career that really solidifies him as a remarkable leading man, capable of taking on anything and truly nailing it, subverting all your expectations. Because as they say in the film, Timmy, he fairly struck me to the ground because he's bursting at the seams with talent. And he just nails Bob Dylan's famous mannerisms and adds his own unique inflection. So we're not watching just a caricature of Bob Dylan, but he's making him his own. And at least to me, that's really inspiring. And it's nice to see an original take, because for as much as I love Austin Butler and Elvis, he's playing Elvis, the caricature, the person that we know. I don't really think he's making Elvis his own individual unique take. While here, for Chalamet, I think that he's really taking this performance as Bob Dylan above and beyond. And you talk about Oscar wins. Personally, I hope that he walks away with the Oscar gold. But if he doesn't, I'm just happy that it seems like people are really responding to this performance. People who have not been a huge fan of Timothée Chalamet so far are recognizing more of his talents. And I know, Matt, you think he might win next year for Best Leading Actor, and I'm very excited to see where the future holds for, I think, one of the best young stars in all of Hollywood.
Seeing it again, I think he's going to win this year.
Yeah, welcome to the club.
Man. Yeah, I've been on record on this channel multiple times saying, like, I think when Elvis came out, I was like, Austin Butler does a good impression, but I don't see the soul of the character. And I felt the same way about Rami Malek. I did love Joaquin Phoenix in Walk the Line. I did love Jamie Foxx and Ray. I think they both got to the soul of those characters rather than just doing an impression. But I feel like Timothée Chalamet gets to the soul of Dylan here. And the reason being that he gets that Bob Dylan is a guy playing a guy. And there, throughout the movie, you see the character that he's playing. At the beginning, he's this shy, shifty-eyed drifter who's just kind of, I'm on the road, man. And he's always kind of guarded, and he seems like he's putting on this fake level of, like, I'm unconfident and I'm mysterious. And there's moments where you see below that, and you see who Bob Dylan actually is, and that this is just a role he's playing, that this is a character that he's decided he wants to be. And later on, when he's the rock star, that's another character that he's playing. And I really like that you can see it's not who he is. It's who he's decided he will be. And so I feel like Timothée Chalamet has some layers to this. He has like a real good understanding that Bob Dylan is someone that doesn't want to be understood. He's got these shields up. So I loved his work in this because of that. Because there's moments you see in his eyes the vulnerability below what he's pretending to be. Love that.
When we talk about Oscars this year, we talk about shocking, surprising nominations. There's one for A Complete Unknown that is honestly the biggest one of the whole Oscar nomination morning. And our special guest here, Nick, was one of the few people I saw in all of social media and all of punditry who was actually predicting Monica Barbaro for Best Supporting Actress. So, Nick, tell us why you were having her in your predictions and why you are a huge fan of this performance.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I kid you not. So I got out of the press screening of this movie, and I literally told the friend that I sat next to for this movie, watch out for Monica Barbaro. Like, there was just something about this performance. She's got the makeup on. She's doing the singing her own herself. She's along for the emotional arc with Timothée Chalamet. So it's like, it's one of those, like, the performance itself, like the narrative for her to get in, I think was always there. It was just one of those, people were so afraid to predict Complete Unknown for nominations. People didn't know what its ceiling was. I just figured that it was such a performance that was so engaging. I kept hearing more and more people love her in the movie. I think she's arguably going toe-to-toe as far as being the standout in the movie with Chalamet, but I see that it's such a performance that she's doing everything she needs to do. Like, we were just kind of talking off air. She's checking every box. I just think that because she's still so new, she's only been in Top Gun Maverick and a few other things. But this is a breakout breakout performance. And you know what? Sometimes that's good enough for you. And sometimes when you have the passion, that's all that you need. So that's why I stuck with it. I just felt it.
I mean, as Bobby says inside the film about Joan Baez, he says, how about that Joan Baez? She's pretty good. She's pretty. She sings pretty too. And Monica Barbaro fits all of those and does them in such an amazing way inside this movie. Like you said, previously seen her in Top Gun Maverick. Unlike a lot of other people, she wasn't one of my standouts for the movie. I enjoyed her, but there was other things I was gravitating more towards. But after seeing her in A Complete Unknown, I was mesmerized just like you. I think she's going toe-to-toe with Timothée Chalamet, and that's such high praise after hearing me praise him in our last section here, because when she speaks about this process of playing Joan Baez and how she had to learn how to sing, play these instruments, and adjust her vocal tones to something that's completely different than her own, that's what acting's all about. And flipping the script on what you know and fully giving yourself over to a role that seems so far removed from anything that you've done previously in your career is just like I said, it's what we love about acting. It's what we love about movies. And at least to me, I found that she really was Joan Baez in like every sense. Like, had I not seen that documentary about Joan Baez a few years ago, I would have thought Barbara was basically her. And This is a nomination that I'm very thrilled about because it shows, like you're saying, that newcomers in the awards space can be seen, can get recognized, and can get the recognition that they do deserve when their performance subverts expectations. And I know that she's unlikely to win, but this is a performance that to me shows that she has more to go in her career and she could become a future Best Actress winner.
I'm going to come from the other side here and say that I actually was disappointed is the wrong word because I didn't really have expectations for Monica Barbaro beforehand. But to me, she wasn't a standout in the film. Now, ultimately, I will say I'm not very familiar with Joan Baez. You know, like I grew up on Pete Seeger's music. I fell in love with Bob Dylan's music in high school. Joan Baez is one that I still have not really gotten into in the same way. So I'm less familiar with her as a singer. And I don't know, this portrayal wasn't giving me a whole lot here. She comes out, she sings the songs, she sings the hell out of the songs, does a great job with that. But in terms of emotional resonance, I didn't get a whole lot out of this character. Maybe controversially, because outside of the National Board of Review, I haven't seen anyone hold this opinion. I preferred Elle Fanning. Elle Fanning, I think, I would have loved to see her get a nomination because I think that Elle Fanning is the core, the emotional core of this film. Because it's a movie about someone who won't let anyone know him. And we see that through the eyes of Elle Fanning, her character who wants to love him, wants to be with him, constantly is being dragged back to him. But in the end, he just will never let her see who he is. And I felt her heartbreak. You know, that scene at Newport where she's watching him and Joan sing, that broke my heart. And seeing her realize, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I can't. Loved it. Loved it. So I don't know. This is less about Monica Barbaro at this point, but to me, the standout supporting actress in the film was Elle Fanning.
And I guess I kind of hold that opinion over in our other supporting category for supporting actor for Edward Norton. And I mean, I like the nomination here. I think that he's really, I talk about this for the previous two actors, but he is subverting what we know from Edward Norton. We haven't really seen him play a character like this in the past. He's usually either the really loud guy, the really self-obsessed guy, or he is just the most showy actor. While here, he's a little bit more quiet. He's a little bit more reserved. He's playing that like nice uncle, nice granddad that you know who's always around, but also has his own opinions throughout. And I mean, I think Norton really nails that. Since seeing A Complete Unknown, I've watched some clips from the folk festival and of these musicians in real life, and I feel like he really nails the mannerisms of Pete Seeger. And like, I saw one clip, and I think it was of Bob Dylan singing at the folk festival, and he's just in the background. He's not even talking. It's like, that looks just like Edward Norton, like even like the body posture and everything too. So like, while he's not my favorite supporting actor nominee of the year, or maybe not even my favorite supporting actor in the movie, I think what Boyd Holbrook does as Johnny Cash is so electrifying. But I think Norton's doing good work here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, was I mad that he got nominated? No, but it's such like you said, it's a more quiet, tender, Mr. Rogers type performance where he's just trying to spread the good word of folk music. It's been a long time since he's been nominated, so he is coming in the field as an actor who is recognizable to the Academy. And all I'm gonna say is, I'd maybe watch out for a surprise win on that front. I do think that I can see the narrative. I think he's got the goods to do it.
I love his portrayal here. I wouldn't think of it as being worthy of like a top 5 mention, but as someone who, like I said, I grew up listening to Pete Seeger. I always on long car rides would have a CD of Pete Seeger in. Little boxes is like second nature to me. He does the voice perfectly. It is a great impression, but like I was mentioning with like Austin Butler, Rami Malek, it's just an impression. There's not a whole lot beyond the impression there. I guess there's a few moments where we see that he's really blown away by this kid, and he kind of takes him under his wing, but then loses control of him. I guess you could see some similar things to like Jeremy Strong in The Apprentice, where he's a mentor that loses control of his creation, right? He wants to mold him in his own image, but then at a certain point, that creation becomes so much bigger than he can handle. And that's an interesting take to it. But for the most part, It's small, it's quiet, it's cute. He's just being that like wholesome folk singer. Like, I love the Mr. Rogers comparison because that's Pete Seeger through and through. He's just a wholesome, like, dad figure in the scheme of folk music. But yeah, I love that singer, and it was great to see such perfect casting. A lot of this comes back to the screenplay, though. We were talking about director earlier and what James Mangold brings. I think he brings most to the writing because he's restrained. He doesn't tell us what to think. There's a lot of scenes that are just completely silent, where we just watch as Bob Dylan kind of moves through the world without talking to anyone. We see that he's just got his inner thoughts. He doesn't need to express himself vocally. And I like that approach to the writing style here. That coupled with everything I said before about how there's layers to the character and how he doesn't let people see him. I just appreciate that this is a script that doesn't feel the need to tell us what to think about this character. It lets us honestly hate the guy for most of the movie. So I don't know. I really appreciated the screenplay.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that maybe the lack of emotional conflict, I think, is where most people's hesitancies, like when I talk to them about the movies, that, they say like, well, there's not really a conflict in the movie. It's kind of like just some things are happening and it's like really happening off screen. But I think, he adapted the overall presence and essence of Bob Dylan in this movie, that, he really adapted the world around Bob Dylan and, how people responded to the adaptation of essentially folk music transitioning out of folk music. I think it was a different kind of adaptation. Like, I could see why that screenplay ultimately got nominated. Well, it wasn't just because the movie got in the Best Picture. I do think that there was something enough that was there for Academy voters to connect to. It was just like, biopics don't usually get screenplay, so that's why people were hesitant to get it. But I found that it was an interesting adaptation to begin with, so that's why I was kind of like, yeah, I think this is going to get adapted screenplay.
Yeah, I fully agree with what both of y'all just said there. And like, this is a nomination no one saw coming months ago, but after seeing the movie, I thought it made total sense because the way that Mangold and Jay Cox's script really subverts this musical biopic genre that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, because instead of presenting that Bob Dylan story, real life story, the Wikipedia articles, you could say, as the gospel, it really turns it into a fantasy and a folklore where this could easily work without being a Bob Dylan movie. Just a film about a musician finding his voice in a changing musical landscape.
It does work.
Filled with great
It's called
performances.
Inside Llewyn Davis.
Well, yeah, exactly. You can make the parallels there too. But in addition to my praise for the screenplay, I will have some reservations for it because Matt and I talked a little bit about this before we started to record today. The first hour and a half of this film before the time jump works so well because of the pace that the screenplay makes. You really care about the people involved. And then when the time jump happens, I feel like the film as a whole kind of loses some of its direction in terms of its narrative, and a lot of these other characters that aren't Bob Dylan kind of get pushed to the back, and you could say that's because he's becoming more of an enigma, he's getting more famous. He has all these letters with Johnny Cash where he talks about, oh, I don't like fame, fame's taking over, blah, 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 and like you can say that's the point of the movie. I didn't like that aspect as much as the rest of the film because it had such great momentum, pace, and energy in the first half. In the second half, while it's filled with great musical sequences, as you were kind of saying, Nick, there's not much tension and you kind of become a little bit more distant with the overall plot at that point, but it's not a major knock. It's just one small thing. But talking about a small thing that I think turns into one of the best aspects of this movie is its sound nomination, because it's immediately noticeable from the very first scene. That opening sequence showcasing the hustle and bustle of New York City just showcases the power of sound and cinema. I've seen this film now 3 times in theaters, each time at a different setting, and each time the sound work is still so incredible, regardless if you're in Dolby, if you're just at a random indie cinema or wherever, because the vibrant noises of New York City really blend seamlessly as Bob Dylan walks through, and you hear so many different cultures and sounds. And Matt, you kind of talked about this with Blitz, where it puts something on screen and you hear it right away, and the camera just weaves throughout as Dylan walks through here. And it's not just the sequence, but the musical numbers throughout really blend the music and the dialogue and the instruments all really well together, and it really showcases the power of live singing on set. You can tell that they were actually singing. This isn't lip syncing like Bohemian Rhapsody, as you said in the past, or it's not a blend of anything else. These actors, they're here, they're playing the instruments, they're singing, they're knocking out the park.
what James Mangold does so well, and I know this is more so like on the sound designers, is that, like the way that a car door slams, the way that, a drink is being opened, or, the sound of a guitar. It's like, he really does make you feel like you're there. So like, that's why I felt like the sound nomination, I feel like, while it was the most likely, there's things that like I love so much about it. And it's because he is such a highbrow, director where like, he'll do those little things where it's like opening a Coca-Cola, or it's like opening a beer, the way that a guitar strums, or the way that people are walking down a city. So like, it's like, it makes you feel like you're there. And I do feel like I don't think we do get enough of that in movies anymore, which is why I always appreciate why movies like that do that.
Something I loved with the sound design here is the way that songs move from person to person, and it just flows between spaces so well. There's one sequence, it's the "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" sequence, where he's singing in his apartment, and then we hear him singing it over, I think he's doing it at the studio after his apartment, and then it moves to Joan playing it in concert, and suddenly it's her voice and her playing the guitar. And then it moves to the radio, and he's in his apartment doing a photo shoot as she's singing over the radio. And the entire time, that whole sequence is driven by the sound design. The whole sequence is driven by, we move from one space to another, and they're singing the same song, but now it's a different person playing the guitar, it's a different person singing, and it's a different space. We're hearing the different ambience of those rooms. And what it does so well is blending those spaces so that even though we're cutting from one place to another, one voice to another, it's never jarring. It just bridges us right in. And that cannot be easy to do, to find the perfect way to flow from one scene to the next while the song doesn't change, although everything about the song changes. The instruments, the singing, beautiful work in that.
That's to move us into our final nomination that a complete unknown racked up at this year's Academy Awards, being costume design. I feel like this one can be really lumped with the rest of the technical craft work inside the film, because I feel like the costumes specifically really set you in the scene. And while I know they do give you title cards throughout saying what year you're in, if the film didn't include those, you would really feel engrossed into these moments. You'd be like, oh yeah, we're in 1961, we're in 1965. You can see the progression of not just trends, but styles inside the music, as well as with visually, with the production design, the cinematography choices that you used throughout, and specifically this costume design nomination.
I think it's an inspired nomination. Like, this is an era that I feel like is often overlooked by the costume design branch. We so often see they love when you go before the 20th century. And sometimes those 20th century movies get overlooked, but it's cool to see a movie that's just like, what you could find in a thrift store get nominated, because the costume work is so good. The way that every character is embodied, you can tell who they are just by looking at how they dress. And we see that through Bob Dylan through the movie, because he plays the different characters, and every time he's playing a different character, every time he's got a different persona, he dresses the part. He's got the Huck Finn cap and the fingerless gloves, and he looks like he could have been in a John Steinbeck novel, riding the top of a train to try and find work. I don't know, Grapes of Wrath. That's what I think of when I see early Bob Dylan. And then suddenly he's wearing leather jackets with aviator glasses, and everything about his style defines who he is at that time. So I think this is a really inspired nomination, and one that I would not have thought of myself, but seeing it get that nomination makes me really consider, they're doing a ton with the costume design here.
Yeah, I guess you can say inspired is probably the right word. I mean, the one thing that I always say is that vintage always sells. Like, there's a reason why we always say vintage is so timeless. It's because no matter how somebody is wearing it or when they choose to decide to wear it, it's going to make you stand out. So I think that, it's always going to be something that's recognized, especially when we get farther and farther away from time periods or, from time period movies. It's always going to be something that stands out. But I do agree with you. Outside of just being like different scarves or just different clothes in general, it's not something that really stood out too much. I could see why I got the nomination, but I was more expecting like makeup and hairstyle over costumes.
So let's talk about that, though. I mean, we should talk, what else should this movie have gotten? So makeup and hairstyling, I think there's a great argument for it there. I mean, watching it this time, I was really taken by, they made Edward Norton look so different. They like changed his facial structure, and really, really strong work with him. But what else do you guys think that this movie should have gotten?
I mean, makeup and hairstyling was the main thing. The first time I saw this movie, I thought was almost a guaranteed nomination, because it's all the stuff with Norton looking like Pete Seeger, but it's also the little things they do to Chalamet. They get rid of his chiseled chin. They give him the little poofs. He has the sideburns. They give him the prosthetic nose. And then on top of that, it's all the period hair work where, yeah, this isn't throwback Renaissance era hair, but it's 1960s hair, and I feel like they really nailed it, and it goes with the costume design too. It engrosses you into this time period, and you feel like you are actually just watching people in the 1960s, not people acting like they're in the 1960s.
I would have loved to see this in cinematography. I don't think it would have made my top 5 of the year, but thinking of the type of thing that the branch typically likes and looking at the 5 that we have, they shot the concert scenes here so well. It's slick, it's polished, the lighting is always just exactly where it should be to give you just the nicest looking version of each shot. And I think a lot of the stuff that it's doing better than how Maria does it, because Maria is doing a lot of those same stage shots with the spotlighting and the sort of haze that covers the stage. And this is doing it so well. So again, my heart's not broken that it's not there. It wouldn't have made my top 5, probably wouldn't have made my top 10 in the category, but it is pretty much the best version of this specific type of polished commercial photography that you could get.
I mean, I echo everything Matt just said there about the cinematography, and I think it works in tandem with everything that I said about James Mangold's direction over in that category. It's a nomination of the realistic contenders would be in my top 5. My personal top 5 of everything, probably not, but of what we would consider the top 10 at the end of the day, it's when I would have liked to see it in there, especially because you have the direct comparison to Maria. But this is not a Maria hate episode, it's a complete unknown love episode. And speaking about loving, my favorite part about this series is the preferential ballots that we do with our guests. So Nick, you're our first guest for the season, so you get to have our very first ballot for the 2025 season. So kick things off. What's your number 10?
Ooh, I feel like I'm going to disappoint a lot of people with this ballot, so Lloyd, help me in the comment section, I guess. I'm going to start off, my number 10 is Amelia Perez. If you love the movie, that's great. All the power to you. This just is one that just did not resonate with me. I could see the messaging behind it and why there is love and acclaim for it. It's just not something that unfortunately clicked for me, so that's unfortunately my number 10. My number 9 is actually a movie that I just caught up on, and it's actually I'm Still Here. Phenomenal movie. I think Fernanda Torres absolutely deserved that Golden Globe win, and I'm so happy that the movie snuck into Best Picture and that she ultimately got into the race. I think that's phenomenal. My number 8 is Nickel Boys. Don't have enough great things to say about Nickel Boys. I think it's a phenomenal directing achievement. Would have maybe in a different year, maybe it gets a lot more love, or maybe if it comes out in a little bit of a different time, maybe things turn out differently. But love that movie. My number 7, A Complete Unknown. Maybe just movie. I only have more great things to think about this movie. I'm just placing it at a very, very good 7, even though some people might say 7's pretty low. I think that it's just a movie that just keeps surging in real time for me. My number 6 is a movie that subverted my expectations, and that's Conclave. Kind of feels like we're going through an actual conclave in the Oscars, so say that for what you will. Thought Ray Fiennes was great. Thought everything about Conclave was utterly intriguing for me. My number 5 is Wicked, just a musical that subverted all of my expectations. Love how just joyful and just how good the movie makes you feel. I got another one, maybe like West Side Story, if it was in a different year, if maybe we had known a part 2 wasn't coming out, maybe this one gets treated a lot more different as far as what its winning package is. My number 4, The Substance, one of my favorite just theater experiences of the entire year. Love Demi Moore, love her comeback, just love the chaotic nature of that whole movie. And the fact that this movie snuck into the Oscars, like actually came on board and not just like as a makeup nod, to me is awesome, because we all know how the Academy treats horror, so that's just awesome that a movie sustained that level of passion for as long as it did. My number 3, Matt's gonna love this one, is Nora. Seems like that movie's turning into a villain, unfortunately, this season for whatever reason. I don't know why. I still hope that it gets original screenplay, because I do think that's the best thing about it. Love Mikey Madison. She's sensational. If you haven't seen Nora, what are you doing? Number 2 is The Brutalist. So that's a movie that I've seen twice. It only gets better for me. Remind me why I love movies. The fact that it was made for under $6 million still blows my mind. Like, what an achievement in filmmaking that is. So kudos to The Brutalist. And my number 1 stayed my number 1 all year. You guys probably know based off process of elimination. It's Dune Part 2. Obviously, the Academy's known to have sequelitis, as I'm calling it. Maybe had we not known that Dune Messiah was coming out so soon, maybe this movie gets treated a lot differently. But Dune Part 2 reminds me why I love blockbusters and why it's important for the Academy to still recognize them and not just in the technical categories. So Dune 2 in a perfect year would be the movie that I would be giving Best Picture to.
And then that's the really fun thing with the Best Picture lineup this year is we have such a diverse catalog of films. We have blockbusters, we have musicals, we have international films, we have 2 international films, and we just have such bold, distinctive visions from top to bottom, and there's really a film for everyone out there. And I mean, I know you could say that every year, but this year specifically feels like it's catering to so many different audiences. And your ballot here, it may parallel some other future ones that we have in this series, but I could also see a world where each one of our guests has such a unique order and a different ranking of these, because honestly, I'll say this, I think every film in our Best Picture lineup this year is a 7 out of 10 or better. So this is one of my, I think, most well-rounded. While I don't think the highs are as high as maybe last year, every movie here I think is a great movie.
I liked seeing that even your number 9, you're still coming out of the gate saying phenomenal film. And that's great. And Dylan, I'll counter you. I have a very controversial opinion. I think that this is a better lineup than last year. I personally wasn't a huge fan of last year's lineup. I've not been secretive about that at all, but I agree. There's something for everyone here, and I think the highs are really, really high. Dune, great number 1 pick. Taste.
Well, speaking of Dune Part 2, that is going to be our next episode here on the 2025 Best Picture Revisiting series. Nick, thank you so much for coming on for this very first installment. Where can people out there find you, check out your podcast, check out your Twitter?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was awesome. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Nick Zednik. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You guys can follow me on Letterboxd especially. That's where I got a lot of things going on. Just type my name, you'll find me. I'm on the Vigilante 1939. It's a DC Marvel box office leaning show. Just type the name of that show and you'll find me there.
That's a wrap on episode 1 of our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting series. Here's the current combined leaderboard for both our guest and Matt and I's preferential ballot. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode where Jonathan Fuji will be joining us to discuss Dune Part 2. But until then, this has been Fantasy Filmball. My name's Dyl. Peace.